Fran Brown, one of the top recruiters in the nation, now the head coach at Syracuse. Manny Diaz could be leaving for a head coaching job. Penn State recruiting could take a turn for the worse if they're not careful.
You are Locked On Nittany Lions, your daily podcast on the Penn State Nittany Lions. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, Penn State fans? That is right. You are Locked On Nittany Lions. Thanks so much for making us your first listen and watch every single day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Zach Seyko, bringing you all things Penn State Nittany Lions, including recruiting. And we bring him back, the expert of recruiting. That is Brian Smith, also part of the Locked On Podcast Network, our recruiting expert and analyst, also the host of Locked On Seminoles, who are very close to a potential college football playoff berth. Today's episode is also brought to you by LinkedIn. So the king of recruiting is Brian Smith. The king of job recruiting is LinkedIn. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. That's why LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the right people for your team faster and for free. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Terms and conditions apply. If you're not already, become an everydayer. Subscribe to the Locked On Nittany Lions podcast on YouTube and wherever you listen to your podcast. Brian, so much has changed here in with the coaching carousel. And the topic that I want to start with first is Fran Brown taking the head coaching job at Syracuse. This was not a surprise, or it shouldn't be a surprise, because Fran Brown is one of the best recruiters. I could argue, I don't know that I could argue the best, but definitely top 5 in terms of all of the country, all the college football playoff programs. Whenever Penn State would get a verbal commit, and then he was the defensive backs coach at Georgia, right? And we had these discussions over the summer. Penn State would land a commit, and then Georgia all of a sudden throws an offer at not one, not two, but I think 3 or 4 names, and Penn State ended up losing most of those to Georgia. Well, it didn't matter what cycle it was, but Fran Brown was a big reason, a big part of that, why kids would go to commit to Penn State and then ultimately would flip or definitely consider Georgia a decommit from Penn State. And now the problem here is, this is why this is bad news for Penn State, is that recruiting prowess comes right into the heart of Penn State's recruiting territory. It's different because Georgia is further down south, Prime, but now you have Fran Brown as the leader of Syracuse, and they're going to recruit in New Jersey, which is where he is really good, bringing New Jersey kids down to Georgia, down to play in the Southeast. But now he can keep them home. He'll recruit New York very well, where Penn State has had some success, and he's probably going to try to make his way into the DMV, DC, Maryland, Virginia. So from your point of view, being the recruiting expert, how bad is it that Fran Brown is now right in the recruiting territory of Penn State?
It depends on his staff to a certain degree, but there's no way around it. He's a Jersey guy.
Mm-hmm.
At some point, even if it's one kid, think about that one player. If it's a 4 or 5 star kid, that change, like especially Penn State needs receiver. What if Fran gets a receiver that Penn State wants this cycle, next cycle, whatever? Penn State, when they've been good my entire life, 80s, 90s and on, they've done their best work when they hit New Jersey very successfully. Where's Fran going to do the most work? New Jersey. So we're going to see some battles. With that said, they were talking about this the other day on the Cover 3 podcast that I listened to. That's one of the worst jobs in the country, because the state of New York is a hoop state as far as high school, like New York City area. I mean, it's ridiculous. But football, there's not enough space. High school football in New York is terrible. There's not that many players. There's 5 to 10 kids a year. 2/3 of them at least leave. They don't support the program there the way they claim to. And we both were talking about that before the show. He's got it up against him. But as I always say on this show, it's about relationships. It's not about what's on the shirt. It's the person wearing the shirt. And everybody over there knows it. I've run into him before on the recruiting trail in Florida. Nice guy, easy to approach. I can see why he's a good recruiter. He's a lot like Sider. Everybody likes it. Same kind of deal. So he's going to get some kids at some point, and it's probably going to tick Penn State fans off, but it's about relationships, man. Just don't, it's still Syracuse, but This isn't the Donovan McNabb Syracuse of like the 90s. This is a different time. So we'll see.
But yeah, Fran Brown being the top recruiter in the country, and that's why he lands this job, because everyone was speculating or criticizing, saying, well, he's just a defensive backs coach. He's a position coach. Why would he become a head coach? Because Syracuse finds the value in what, and from his perspective, you take the head coaching opportunity, whether you feel like you're ready or not. Is he exactly in a place to succeed? Who knows? Because Matt Rule did make that comment. One of his assistants was interested, or vice versa. Syracuse was interested in his assistant, or the assistant was interested in Syracuse. And he said, well, I encourage my coaching staff to take opportunities where they can succeed. He didn't specifically say Syracuse, but since the two were linked with one another, he kind of indirectly but directly said this about Syracuse, that they expect a 10-win season, but only make the investment of a 6-win program.
He's right. I mean, when was the last time you saw an article, a podcast, even an offhanded comment by somebody in the media or a recruit saying, well, Syracuse's facilities are SEC or Big Ten like. Syracuse does this and all these other things to get recruits there or get coaches there. Or they none of it.
Yep.
They put their money in basketball. It's the cheaper sport. I get it. It's not even competitive. But if you're this is the big lie. They have no chance long term. They have none because of their location of the school. However, you're not going to get the coffers to open up and overflow if you tell your boosters, yeah, we're going 6-6 this year. We're happy.
Mm-hmm.
It is what it is. They have to lie. So, it's not going to be a program that's consistent. But when was the last time they had a great quarterback or anything else? He'll get some players there.
Yeah.
Now how he gets the staff going, like he has to hit the ground running. Who's going to invest in that guy as a first-time head coach? That's the big question. Because if not, he'll be done in 2-3 years. I don't care where you're at. There's no patience anywhere. So if Syracuse doesn't like overspend on their assistant staff, and I truly mean by like SEC standards,
right,
which is insane, he will not succeed there. He will not.
Well, you mentioned staff, and I think that's an excellent point, because there's the indirect ways that this can hurt Penn State's recruiting efforts. There's also the direct ways. So this comes from HappyValleyInsider.com. Richie Schneider, the one, and I want to credit him with the piece of news information, is that there's a particular staff member, a part of Penn State, Khalil Ahmad, who is the director, the recruiting coordinator for personnel and recruitment. And he was on the same staff at Rutgers with Fran Brown.
Oh.
I imagine that's why, and Ahmad has a lot of influence and is one of the reasons that Penn State has been able to get a lot more recruits, commitments out of the state of New Jersey. So if Fran Brown's going to return to his roots and say, let me focus on dominating New Jersey as best as I can, and then I'll focus on New York, even though Syracuse is in New York. But Fran Brown coached at Rutgers. Ahmad was a recruiting staff member at Rutgers. Those guys are very close. If Fran Brown's going to do any damage, it would be taking one of Penn State's best recruiting assistants in the entire program. That would sting.
That's the nature of the beast. And there's a lot of coaches that talk about this. Cristobal mentioned recently that you always have like 3 guys at every spot on a list, because you don't know when somebody's going to get a phone call on your staff and they got to take it.
Yeah.
He said, he looks at it like it's an exciting opportunity to get better because you're challenged, which is probably the right way to look at it. Even Ohio State and Texas and these schools that spend uber amounts of money on their staffs, nobody likes sitting in the same spot forever. When they get a chance to be the coordinator or the head coach, they're going to leave. Penn State has to be able to meet that challenge too. And it's Penn State. Look, I'm not going to shed a tear for anybody over there. They got the money and the backing, so they need to figure that out. But there's a lot of key guys in New Jersey. Maybe they hire one of the head coaches from one of those Catholic schools like Bergen or something. I don't know.
Penn State's doing that. Yep.
And you got to make them a position coach, though. That's the thing anymore. Can't just put them in the. It's got to be somebody that can go on the trail year round. That's the conundrum. It's a tough spot, but Penn State is not going to beat Ohio State or Michigan anytime soon without elite New Jersey talent. They got to win there in the DMV. It's not any secret. And then they get a few kids down south where I live to kind of sprinkle in. But if they start losing those New Jersey kids, that's not going to end well.
Well, so the New Jersey kids that come to mind, and I would even include Josiah Brown in there as well, wide receiver. But I'm not so worried about the class of 2024 because signing day is less than a month away. We know middle of December here. Fran Brown can only make so many recruiting pitches, so I think those recruits are safe. But I think about the ones that are committed right now. DJ McClary out of New Jersey. So Vabu Toure is one of them, and Josiah Brown out of the state of New York. I think those guys are going to commit to Penn State still because Vabu Toure, his older brother, if he goes to Rutgers and Toure decides to go to Penn State, I think that one's safe. However, I look at 2025 where there's a lot of room to work with. There's a lot of time to still build these relationships. Fran Brown has ample opportunity to make a pitch to a DJ McClary and an Amari Gaines. And Amari Gaines most likely projects as a defensive back here. He's listed as an athlete, but I would say that he's going to be a cornerback, DJ McClary, that star linebacker in the class of 2025. Fran Brown could build a connection with them, and Gaines makes sense since Fran Brown was. I'm not implying that they're going to flip immediately, but don't tell me that Fran Brown isn't going to try.
Why wouldn't he? What does he have to lose? You know, I mean, he knows everybody in that state over there in Jersey, and he's going to know the greater New York area as well. He's recruited it. He grew up in the area. There's not a phone call that he doesn't have the opportunity to make that's not already on his iPhone. That's it. So it'll be interesting because it's been a long time for me. But in the 80s and 90s and early 2000s, Syracuse did really good job of bringing in kids from Florida, Georgia, all over the place. They've obviously fallen off the map. Right. But this guy's a different kind of recruiter. I think on this straight up, the reason he got the chance is recruiting. It wasn't because of coaching.
Oh, yeah.
There's no doubt about it. Because not that he can't coach, but like Kirby's going to get all the credit, fair or not, for the defense always. Mm-hmm. He just is. So it's hard as a defensive assistant to move up unless you're an elite recruiter. Dan Lanning didn't get the Oregon job just because he was DC. He got it because he could recruit. Yep. So that's a situation that's worked out for him. We can still work out for this guy too. But man, the Syracuse job compared to the Oregon job is apples and oranges. That's a big difference. So good luck to him on that. But he could steal a few kids from the Ohio States and Penn States back east.
Since we are talking recruiting, I mean, Fran Brown's just one domino. What if Manny Diaz were to actually leave? This is simply speculation, but there's going to be a significant impact on recruiting if Penn State not only has to replace one coordinator on the offensive side of the football, but if Manny Diaz goes, there could be some serious ramifications. And I'm glad we have Brian on to discuss that in just a moment. Let's hear from our sponsor on today's Cruton episode. And the king of job recruiting is LinkedIn Jobs. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. You want to be 100% certain you have access to the best qualified candidates available. Well, you got to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the right people for your team faster and for free. It's easy to create a free job post on LinkedIn Jobs, then add your job in the purple hiring frame to your LinkedIn profile to spread the word that you are, in fact, hiring. Simple tools like screening questions make it easy to focus on the candidates with just the right skills, just the right experience, so you can quickly prioritize who you'd like to interview and then hire. That's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality hires versus the leading competitors. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Again, that is linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Terms and conditions apply. And also want to shout out another one of our sponsors on today's episode. Making this one possible is eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. What brings home the winning trophy is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to its peak performance. From superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay guaranteed fit. Only available to U.S. customers. And the Locked On Podcast Network is proud of this one, launching the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. So what if Manny Diaz actually were to leave? What is the recruiting impact from that? And that's why we bring him on, because Brian's the expert too. And especially since Manny Diaz was the head coach down in Miami, Florida, where you are based, Brian. So you have an excellent understanding, an excellent perspective to this. So my question simply is, what happens if Manny Diaz does take the job at Duke, or ultimately when he does take a head coaching job somewhere else? What is the recruiting fallout for Penn State, whether it's this cycle or hopefully in the distant future, but it's going to happen at some point?
I think it's okay, because if it happens, that means you've had success. And obviously they have a top 10 defense by pretty much any metric that you want to go by, the eye test in particular. We're going to bring in good assistants. That's what you have to sell as a program, because Saban loses them every year. Kirby does, everybody. If you're going to win big, they're going to come to get your assistants, period. And he's not been a successful head coach, period, but he has been a head coach. That helps too. So Manny's a decent recruiter, not a great one, but maybe he's around the block enough at Penn State that he's learned his lessons on how to do that better. I would be surprised if he's not somewhere next year, but it could be a year or two, depending on what level he wants to go. If he's determined to be Power 5, it's more limited, but Penn State should be able to replace him a little bit easier. The cupboard is not exactly bare over there. It's not going to be that hard to get somebody, I would think. It's Penn State too. They're going to throw some cash at somebody. So I don't think it'll be a huge drop-off, to be honest.
So the linebacker position, and that's what Manny Diaz is. He's the defensive coordinator plus the linebackers coach. And Stacey Collins is the outside linebackers coach to go along with what he does with the special teams coordinator spot. But so that means Manny Diaz is essentially in charge of Abdul Carter, Tony Rojas to an extent. Tony Rojas bounces around, Keon Wiley. And like I said, they collaborate together. So Stacey Collins and Manny Diaz work together. But Manny Diaz has gotten some good linebacker commits. Now this is where a Fran Brown and a Manny Diaz combining together, these hypothetical scenarios are the perfect storm for, well, Penn State's going to have to work extra hard to keep someone like a DJ McClary in the class of 2025, because DJ McClary is committing to Manny Diaz and that defense. If that's no longer there, the conversation gets different, and now Fran Brown in the fold. So that's just a hypothetical, right? But something definitely to consider. But you're saying that Manny Diaz walking away and taking another head coaching job isn't such a, yes, it's bad in the sense of, well, you lose the architect of this defense, but it's not exactly completely difficult that they wouldn't be able to replace it and keep that standard, keep that bar pretty high.
I don't think so, because Penn State will pay for what they need. It has tradition. It's a place where it's not as difficult to get coaches to go, because it's not an expensive place to live. I think you can have a family there, and it's a little bit easier. Like LA has a harder time getting coaches to want to go out there. It's a crazy place. So USC, UCLA, a little different. I think it's an attractive place too. Just again, you're going to walk in and have top 20 talent at pretty much every position.
Yeah.
If that's not attractive to a defensive coach, do you want him at Penn State? I mean, I wouldn't. So that's how I look at it. And maybe I'm biased because I kind of grew up watching Penn State, being a Midwest guy, but I just don't think it'll be that difficult. I really don't.
What about the Florida aspect of it? And that's the final thought here. Manny Diaz being a Florida guy, coaching at Miami of Florida, I feel like him and J1 Sider can team up, and just in general, aside from positional recruiting, but the regional recruiting, if J1 Sider's still there, but Manny Diaz is hypothetically not, I feel like the Florida recruiting doesn't take that much of the Southeastern recruiting doesn't really take that much of a hit.
Probably not. He's the guy that can tag team with that, but he didn't do a very good job when he was at Miami recruiting. He did not.
Interesting. That is it. That is so interesting.
No, I mean, I have bad stories. So it's one of the reasons he got run out of Dodge. So maybe he's changed, but that was not his forte. And I'm being kind when he was at the University of Miami.
Where do you expect to see him land? Is it, and so much can change. We're having this conversation on Wednesday, November 29th, just for everybody to know, depending on when you're watching or listening to this back. Brian, do you think Duke is a good fit for him? Do you think he's in line for a Big Ten school will give him an opportunity, an SEC school? Because I thought Mississippi State would be calling him since he coached there not once, but twice. Where do you think it's appropriate from two perspectives? What is your opinion of Manny Diaz as a head coach? And what is the football world's opinion of Manny Diaz as a head coach? How do they view him? Do they see him as an SEC or a Big Ten head coach?
In Florida, he's not viewed as a head coach at all.
Okay.
I'm just being honest. Like, that's a hell no. So how ADs look at it and agents trying to manipulate, and then you just look at it. Look, fans assume often and with failure that ADs, the boosters, the board of regents at school X, whatever one it is, they're trying to win. The answer is not really. There are only about 18 to 22 schools that can really win. Penn State's one of them. Duke is not. Okay, what they've done, going 6-6 at Duke is not easy. Elko is a better coach than Manny as a head coach. I think he already proved that. They might take Manny because they're not going to spend a ton, but like if he was hired at Mississippi State, there would be pitchforks. They have completely unrealistic expectations in Mississippi State. They have no chance in that league. None. But their fan base thinks they do. And that's arguably as bad an AD job as there is in the country, because the fan base and reality have nothing in common. But there's only a few jobs in the Power Five I could see, like Vanderbilt, Duke, etc. Manny's a smart guy. I think he'd be better in something like the MAC. I really do. But maybe the Sun Belt. He was a disaster at Miami. So I just don't think he's a Power Five coach as a head man.
Wow. That is those are some serious words about Manny Diaz, because I see it just because he recreated the Penn State because he took a Penn State run defense that was not good. It was mediocre in 2022 to now being a top 3 rush defense. With the pieces that he had in play, he made all the players around him better, I feel like. But maybe that's because you're a good head coach for the defense, maybe not a program leader, but I see it differently. But you had a firsthand experience being down in Florida, knowing what goes on at all those universities, particularly the Hurricanes. And so I'll take your word. I don't think that you're being dishonest here, Brian. I don't think you're lying to me.
No, he didn't run it well enough in the recruiting area more than anything else. And he wasn't the only one. Miami had a few coaches like that. Yep. And they were having kids walk out of their own backyard. They barely recruited that were top 200 kids. It was just insane. And he was one of them. So when he got fired, they had just gotten a commitment from now linebacker at Miami, Wesley Besaint. He was the only kid in that recruiting class from South Florida. And he had just committed, and like a week later, Manny got fired. For months, they didn't have a South Florida kid committed, and he's at the University of Miami. I'm sorry, that's not a head coach material, in my opinion.
Wow. So maybe that's good news for Penn State, that they'll be able to keep Manny Diaz around for 2, 3, 4 years, because one man's trash, and I'm not trying to say that Manny Diaz, I'm saying the phrase, but Manny Diaz is certainly not trash, but you can understand that Penn State, if they value him as the defensive coordinator and can keep him around, that is good in the case.
Oh yeah. He's a great coordinator. He's a great coordinator. That's not even debatable. I mean, they've hit the home run this year. But, being a head coach is hard, man. There's only a handful that don't get fired in the first 3 to 4 years, wherever they're at. It's hard.
So as we get into our final segment on the show, there's a few housekeeping things in terms of recruiting. National Signing Day is very close. We're just a few weeks away. And a couple names that Penn State fans need to know about going into this recruiting cycle, because we've talked about how can Penn State build up this class of 2024. It seems like it's going to stay put rather than kind of breaking through that glass ceiling for the cycle in 2024. Brian and I will discuss in just a moment. Let's hear from another one of our sponsors on today's episode, and that is PrizePicks. PrizePicks is the largest independently owned daily fantasy sports platform in North America. The easiest and most exciting way to play DFS. It's just you against the numbers. Instead of battling thousands of other players, including pros and sharks, you pick more than or less than on a 2 to 6 player stat projection and watch those winnings roll in. If you have the skills, you can turn $10 into $250 with just a few taps. PrizePicks is really simple to play. You make your picks and submit your entry in less than 60 seconds. Quick withdrawals, easy gameplay, as I've said, and an enormous selection of players and stat types are what makes PrizePicks the number one daily fantasy sports app. And with the PrizePicks reboot policy, your entries stay in play even if one of your players gets injured. For NFL games, college football, top 25 matchups, if you have a player that exits the game in the first half and does not return in the second, that player is then rebooted. PrizePicks is the only daily fantasy sports platform with injury insurance. So now what do you got to do? You go to prizepicks.com/lockedoncollege and use code lockedoncollege for a first deposit match up to $100. prizepicks.com/lockedoncollege, promo code lockedoncollege for a first deposit match up to $100. PrizePicks, daily fantasy sports made easy. And in this final segment, we're going to discuss a couple of names that were on Penn State's radar that don't seem to be on the Nittany Lions radar anymore. And remember to become an everydayer, subscribe to Locked On Nittany Lions on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. Also, Brian's show doing an incredible job over at Locked On Seminoles. Go check out that show as well and subscribe and follow along wherever you listen to your podcast. A couple names that have come to mind, but there's one that's completely off the board. One that maybe there's still a chance for Penn State, but the news doesn't look good. We'll start with the one that Penn State, there's nothing they can do unless maybe they flip him on signing day, because he is now verbally committed to Illinois, and that is offensive lineman Andrew Dennis, originally committed to Michigan State. Jonathan Smith was not able to retain him. He ends up committing to Brett Bielema and the Fighting Illini. And I wonder how much longer Brett Bielema is going to be at Illinois, but maybe they're committed and they see him, they see the process, because he did have a good season in 2022. 2023 took a major step back, but I feel like this isn't a massive loss for Penn State because there were just too many offensive linemen that were already committed in the class of 2024. Don't forget about the class of 2023, 2022. I really didn't see a path. It was nice to get another player on the offensive line for Penn State, but Andrew Dennis certainly was not a need for them based on what Phil Troutwine and James Franklin have done with the offensive line over the past 3 recruiting cycles, Brian.
It's always great to get numbers in the trenches. Right
Sure.
now, with the portal getting ready to open next Monday, O-line is thin, and I'm being very nice in saying that. But at the same time, Penn State's one of the few, maybe 5 to 8 schools that
And
in
a
the
good
last
spot.
3 years, yeah, they've hit the numbers, and they've hit on a lot of 4 and 5 star kind of players. They'll be fine. They can get away with that. Now, Michigan State losing Andrew Dennis is bad because he might have played.
Yeah.
Their rebuild is insane.
Yeah.
Jonathan Smith is an elite coach, but got to have ball players. So big pickup for Illinois, but Penn State will be fine.
Certainly. I think that's a major win for Illinois. It is not a
Yes.
loss by any means for Penn State. They have enough commits, like I said, in 2024, in addition to the guys that are now becoming veterans from 2022, 2023. I really just did not see a spot for Andrew Dennis. Another one that becomes a little interesting is Ernest Willer, because I think in Penn State's case, you can never have too many. Now, offensive line is secure, but defensive line, Deion Barnes is off to a good start. They have a lot of interior defensive linemen, but not enough edge rushers. They really only have 2 commits at that spot. Ernest Willer is a 4-star. He's scheduling some last-minute official visits, and this is the list. This is courtesy of Happy Valley Insider, Penn State rivals. Go check them out, happyvalleyinsider.com. Wisconsin, Ohio State, and Maryland, Dylan Callaghan-Crowley is reporting. So a lot of Big Ten schools, all Big Ten schools, but does not include Penn State. And I thought Penn State was in his top 5. I guess not.
There's a couple of thoughts here. I wouldn't be shocked if they got a portal kid they already know they're going to get, and
Sure.
or they're just happy with the development of some younger players. You never know.
Mhm.
I'm not worried about Penn State in defense. If we're
Yep.
talking about losing a receiver, you should start throwing things through windows because
Ooh,
they can't
yeah.
afford to do that. Defense, we're good to go.
Yeah, Ernest will, just because you only have the two defense. Thank goodness they got Jalen Harvey that they did. I know that was a long process. How many episodes and conversations
Oh,
we devoted to that, but I feel like if you can couple the three of them together, right? You have now Ernest Willer as that third defensive end. It's just like with the age of the transfer portal, it's the more the merrier.
if you can get 2 a year and like
Okay.
every second or third year, get a portal guy that can come in and help, doesn't have to be a starter, you'll be fine. Penn State's defensive staff is really good at evaluating. They not only bring in the right kids, they know exactly where to put them. I mean, they've proven it.
Yeah.
So again, I'm not as worried there. They hit a higher percentage than about anybody on defense. I'm not worried about this. They'll figure that out. They've already got the track record, and the stats this year are incredible. Even against Ohio State and Michigan, they played really good defense. They shouldn't be worried about it if you're a Penn State fan.
So, Brian, I guess that means that Penn State's staying put. Like, this is it for the class of 2024. Maybe they're having some conversations, but it feels like some of those last second targets and this can still go beyond. We saw them get a commitment from Chimney Ono in the second national signing day. This is the early one in December. This will continue for a couple more months. So maybe Ernest Willer, even though he hasn't scheduled an official visit, I can't imagine that he's going to make a commitment before the December date. This one might go into February. That's just him specifically. But I can't help but think that three wide receivers, because you brought it up, so I'm going to continue with it, that three wide receivers is not enough in this case. I know the transfer portal exists, but can you get somebody else that maybe is a fringe 3-star with maybe some potential, some light at the end of the tunnel here that could really turn out to be a surprise prospect?
They could, but I'm thinking they want somebody that's already developed.
Yeah,
That's look,
that's the preference. Yeah.
I mean, the catch 22 is why would anybody come? I mean, I'm just being honest. I know Penn State fans don't want to hear it, but their passing game's anemic. So,
Ooh.
I mean, there's no nice way to say it. If you're a top-notch guy, why in the hell would you go to Penn State right now? I mean, it's just the opposite of the defense. So I don't know, unless it's a guy that's got a connection to Pennsylvania. Maybe it's one of the Ivy League kids or something that just blew up. That's about the only way I could see it.
So you're thinking more transfer portal. How many transfer portal guys do you think they need? 2, 3, everybody?
I mean, it depends on your perspective, but left tackle, D line, and receiver and corner, those doors are always open for elite players.
Hmm.
Because I mean, if you look at the NFL draft, where are the top guys at? It's the same deal in college because they're rare. So the measurables and all that you need there are just different. Penn State is, I mean, running back. I mean, hell, there's no way they're taking a running back unless it's like a blocking back, the H-back.
Yeah.
And they've got everything else they need. Like the quarterback just needs to develop. They've got linemen for the most part, but a pure left tackle you'd look at.
Yeah.
I mean, what else would you need? Maybe 5 kids, some depth part, a kicker. Never look at, that's a spot where you always want, you don't have to recruit kickers. Take the experienced guy from some other school. It's what most the big name schools do now. And then on top of that, if you want, maybe there's a kid that's just a fit, that's a backup linebacker or something. That's fine too.
That's why we bring Brian Smith on, because of the insight, the analysis, also the bluntness, the honesty that he provides as well. Brian, I appreciate the assessment as always, and we're so close to the early national signing day. So these weeks are really going to heat up. Maybe Penn State does get a surprise, and I think the transfer portal fits in here as well. So I'm eager and excited to have more conversations about recruiting, in addition to the transfer portal as well, with you in the not too distant future, Brian.
Thank you very much. I look forward to it.